Christopher Cerasoli, who is the Associate Director of People Analytics at Boehringer Ingelheim. I think I've got that right, have I? Yeah, I've probably pronounced it very badly, but yeah. So Christopher's going to talk about how we can use simplicity in people analytics and do that thing that we're always asked to do, whether we're in HR or people analytics, how we can do more with less. So Christopher, over to you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David. So good afternoon. This is usually the time of the day where I have my midday slump and I'm either remote or in the office, so I'm dozing off. So I won't take any offense if I see a few nods, but I promise, I teach in my spare time. I won't be dropping any textbooks or anything. So just give a shout if you need. So super excited to be here. This has been something I've been looking forward to seeing stateside for a while. Definitely followed in the UK and elsewhere. So there's been a lot that I've seen today, some fantastic sessions. We've heard a lot about AI, machine learning, some other things, some ethics, which I absolutely love. And I think that as a field, we're really magnetized to those things because they're sexy, they're flashy, they're cool. But it started to make me think and reflect about some things recently as I've seen that. Because I think about the basics. I'm one of those people, my wife, gives me some flack that I really think hard on a lot of things. And this is one of those places I've thought really hard. When I think, to me, about what I really do in people analytics, the core of my job, it's not to run data. My job is to change hearts and minds. Because if I'm doing my job, there's action being taken. People are being convinced to do something different, to actually change something. And so I think really carefully, how do I change hearts and minds? And the best way I know how to do that is to meet my partners where they are, my stakeholders. I've got to match their level of complexity. I've got to match their level of readiness. I've got to be where they are. I've got to be where they are as a person. I've got to show up to be relevant to them, to what they're working on that day, and how it goes back to their organizational strategy. So as I've seen out in the marketplace on all of our socials and everything, it seems like things are getting more complex. And I've started to think about this. It almost feels like this complexity is inescapable. It feels like it's the rage in people analytics these days, right? Anything you see for the sessions that come up, a lot of the stuff that we do, and not talking down on it, but it seems like it's everywhere. At times, and it almost feels like it's inescapable. It's this inexorable pull that whatever we do, we have to get more complex and more complicated with. Now, there's not a lot of writing on this, on the simpler stuff anymore, because there's so much that is crowding out our sort of sphere of consciousness. From simple stuff, from my background as an IO psychologist, to logistic regressions and correlations and driver analyses and some really cool stuff there, we get more and more and more sophisticated. And I get it, that sophisticated feels sexy. It gives us something that we can talk about. It gives us something we can write about. It gives us something where we can get those clicks and likes and subscribes. And I read all those. Well, as many as I can. I've got an hour and a half commute back and forth, so I listen to the podcast. Thank you, digital HR leaders and others. And I get it, but I wonder if we might have gone too far. I wonder if we're losing something in all of the sophistication that maybe could be useful. So I think about this, are we actually creating the smart toaster oven of people analytics? Now, for anyone who hasn't seen this, and forgive me, I'm a little bit of a technophile, so I love technology, you can get a smart toaster oven. It has an Alexa embedded, and it will do all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, do you really need a smart toaster oven? You're going to take 2 pieces of bread, or maybe even 4, or 2 bagels if you get really crazy. We're in New York, so if you're not from here, please get the bagels. You'll be spoiled for life. And you don't toast bagels in the city, at least proper, but I do elsewhere. But if all you need is a slice of toast and you need that to move on with your day, why not take the 2 pieces of bread, put it in the toaster, and get on with what you're doing? And so that's kind of what I want to think about. Now, again, don't get me wrong. There's a time and a place for complexity, and I want to talk about that. But perhaps that's not the natural progression of how we measure ourselves. That's not naturally how we get our sense of growth and get better as a team. Perhaps simplicity, not complexity, is the natural progression of people analytics. If all your audience wants is toast, give them an elegant toaster. And in fact, this is just a quick screen grab of a toaster that's out there. And if I actually go back to the previous slide, I asked generative AI, well, we all know we're talking about ChatGPT here. I asked generative AI, give me a picture of data that shows complexity. And when you first look at that picture, man, it looks kind of complex, right? And like everyone else, like, oh, that looks kind of cool. You've got the blue lights in the data center. You've got the cables all over the place. That looks complex. But when you look closer, take a second look, those cables aren't plugged into anything. And they tie back in circles on themselves. And the more you question that, the more like, I'm not really sure this is giving me anything other than some stuff that's cobbled together. And as we talked in other sessions here, that black box feature is hard to unpack. Well, you got the black box right there in front of you. I don't like what we see. Now, again, there's a time and a place for all of it. I'm just not sure we're there. So what I would like to do today, because this is sort of my go-to, I'd like to share a few myths, I think, about this push towards complexity. And I'd like to take it back to, well, what if we didn't go complex? What if we went simple? So I'm going to just run through a couple of myths. Now, I grew up in the 80s and 90s in the US, and we listened to on the weekend, American Top 40, what's your favorite songs of the week, whatever. I don't know who really voted on them, and I love those. I'm not going to give you 40, I'm going to give you 5. And then I want to paint a picture of a different reality, and then I'd like you to challenge my view on that simplicity, where we're going to have that Q&A, and David's going to ask a few questions. You guys will have good questions, and I love the front and center here. So what I like to do is just count them back, and I have brought in my friend because I shamelessly use things that are there. I brought in PowerPoint Manny, who you will see in the bottom of the slides. And I'll take you from myth 5 to 1. And by the way, this is Microsoft PowerPoint, so I can apparently use it if I want. Sorry, Mr. Gates. So one of the first myths that we see, I think, in people analytics is that if you want to get scale, you get more complex. You bring in the machine learning, you bring in the AI, you bring in Alteryx, you bring in all these other things, you got to get more complex. That sophistication is how we get that uptake, right? That's how we show we're valuable to the business. I don't think so. I don't think it's complexity that drives scale. I think it's simplicity that drives scale. And again, why do I care about scale? Scale is how we get to 2 + 2 being 5. There's not a lot of us out there. Yeah, we've grown, and David shared we're 1 in 2,300 or something like that. That's still not a lot of headcount. HRBPs outnumber us 4 to 1 in some cases. So we've got to scale. If we've got simplicity in our data flows, if we've got simplicity in our storytelling, we've got less overhead. I think Amit Mohindra was here, and I think this quote's attributed to him, but insights without action is overhead. And I'm sorry if I misattributed that, but it's a great quote, whoever said it. We don't want overhead. That's the enemy of our ability to scale. And if we've got simplicity, we can scale really easily. If I've got less overhead and simpler things, I've got less to maintain. I don't need another headcount on my team. Our team actually gave up a headcount for this a couple of years ago because we stayed laser focused on simplicity and scalability. And if I don't have to worry about things maintaining, I have fewer things I have to worry about failing. I don't have to worry about logarithmic transformations I had somewhere. I don't have to worry about some manual process here. If I keep it simple and focus on the storytelling and have consistency there, it's fewer failure points. And ultimately, that simplicity enables me to get more juice, less squeeze. Same amount of work, bigger scale. So number 4, this is one of those things that I think kind of came up before. We like to wow our leaders. Right? And so we think, especially when we're brand new, we've got to notch out those wins if we're going to be relevant. We think if we build something really complex in advance, we're going to wow our leaders. Wow, look at what we built. Super cool, right? This is sort of that first design principle's gone wrong. But simplicity is really what I think wows leaders. If I give a leader 2 lines on a chart, and that's the only thing I talk about, and then the rest is the story, I don't have to educate them on a lot of that. I don't have to bring them up to speed. If I don't have to educate them on that, it's a good song, I don't have more things I have to clarify. I assume, and this is a good rule of thumb, every piece of data you put on a PowerPoint slide, assume you're going to get 3 questions for. If I put 3 pieces of data, I'm going to get 9. I put 9, it's too many to do the math up here. But anyways, it's not worth that time, so I don't have to do that clarification, which means I don't get rock throwing. And when you deal with senior leaders, at least in my experience, the higher up you go up the chain, they're supposed to know more. If you've ever dealt with physicians, scientists, they're supposed to know more. They have PhDs in their name. I dropped mine for my signature for 2 years because I didn't want to go toe-to-toe with them. That was a real ego bruise, by the way, but it worked. So if I don't have to worry about rock throwing, I can get more uptake. And if I've got a simple model and simple storytelling, the business leader can ask me a question. You're going to ask me a question too. I hope you do. Ask me a question. If it's a simple model, I can come back. I give you turnover rates. They say, well, what about our top performers? I'll show up tomorrow. See you later. Okay, we show up, they say, well, what about males versus females? I'll see you the next time. If we have it simple, we can show up to sell another day. I say that because my belief, and make no mistake, we are in the job of sales. We're selling ideas, we're selling different frameworks, but we've got to sell that. So if I can show up, I can sell things. And less fear means more uptake. When leaders don't know something, their natural inclination is to throw rocks. If it's simple, they're not going to do that. Myth number 3, this IO psychologist in the room, MBAs, anybody who wants to know why we do the things we do, we feel compelled to get all that nuance out of the way. That's on us, not on our business leaders. We feel we need to know everyone's story before we act. What does it look like for people in this location who were born on this date, who are this gender and so forth? That sounds great, but it really gets in the way. It's not nuance that drives the action, it's parsimony. How can you make it a smaller question faster for the leaders to faster get to it? I want to give you a way that I look at it. Your data should not be the movie, it should be the glasses your leaders put on to watch it. We want the leaders to see the movie of their business through our glasses because we can refocus it. So it's going to be dirt on them. Maybe there's a little scratch, but we give them the right glasses. They can see their own story in a way they hadn't seen before, which makes it easier to validate. It passes the sniff test. My sentiment went down this month. That's right. We announced a RIF a week before, which, if our goal is to get to action, it enables quicker course corrections. So if we're simple, we could show up insight, action, 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 insight, action, action, action. It really is a loop that we want to take. This is also kind of ingrained in that desire to know why. We think we can't fully act without knowing why. We think actionability requires why. And I can't tell you again how many memes or whatever we see on Facebook. Don't do X, Y, or Z before you know why employees are doing that. I'll take a different point. I don't think your leaders, when they ask you why, I don't think they really mean why. I think they mean where. Why is our turnover going up or down? What they really want to know is it for our top performers or bottom performers? Is it higher for folks in this location or that location? The difference, people analytics, I should say, is not people science. People analytics is not statistics. The core difference between people science or people analytics, people science, data science even, and statistics, and people analytics is action. We are there to compel action in a credible, compelling way. So we rarely get to the why, even if we try. Look, we can't boil the ocean, but we can sure as hell map it. And if we can map it, we can tell people where to dive, where they need to find that treasure. If our goal is action, then that actionability is going to really force us to pursue where. This final one kind of comes full circle to, I think, David and Jonathan's book, Excellence in People Analytics. It makes the case that we tend to think that maturity equals complexity. Who has heard the description, prediction, prescription? I mean, raise your hand if you've heard that, said it, seen it elsewhere. I mean, I grew up on that. I ate that for breakfast. And now I wish I hadn't, because as I look back, I saw we all thought the natural progression of our team, the way we measure the worth of our teams and the growth of our teams, is sophistication and complexity. It's not complexity, it's impact. The best operating team will get more and more simple over time, and its impact goes up over time. And if you do that, you could almost get rid of headcount. Please don't ever do that. But you could. If you get more juice for less squeeze, and you can give compelling, credible ways to just get enough data from the business for them to see what they need to see and then get out of the way, you're a rock star. That is the ultimate scalability, and that's what impact. And that's why simplicity gets decision makers to impactful action with greater speed and efficiency. So I want to give sort of a couple of closing thoughts. I want to invite David up here and get a few questions. This should build nice and clearly, but you get it all at once. To the first point above, think inside the box. That sounds cliche or doesn't, but think inside the box. I live by that. Take the things you have and work with them as they are. Find the simplest things that you have and get those solutions to go. That second one ties to the reason why we want to show up with flashy and sexy. It ties to the reason why we want to show up and bedazzle our leaders. Sexy sells, flashy tech is appealing. You get this really bright light, it's bedazzling, but a bright light for too long, like these lights up here, they'll eventually start to blind you. You've been in those conference calls and you've got the lights facing you because you want to look really, really good. Eventually it's like, I got to tap out, I can't keep doing this. It's not something we could do. To that third point, It's not wrong if it works. Remember, we're not the data people. We're the storytellers. And again, for folks in the back who haven't heard this, or all the way over there, we've got this unbalanced room. I can't tell you how many times I have to reinforce to my partners, we are not the data people. We've got reporting people that maybe, we've got other folks, but we are not the data people. We are your storytellers. We're here to give you a framework to think about the world. And the simpler I make that framework, the more effective I am as a people analytics consulting. And finally, the way that I view this is if your people analytics team is working the way it should and doing the things it should be doing, 10% of their time should be spent on data and 90% consulting, not the other way around. If you find you're doing it the other way around, take pause and take stock, because that's the enemy of you really scaling. And if ultimately your job is to change hearts and minds, you need that consulting time to be able to be doing that, for the most part. And if anybody has cracked the code to do another way, I would love to hear it. So thank you. One, here's some questions, and Dave would welcome sort of your feedback as well.
And we do have just about 5 minutes for questions. So if anyone's got a question, there's one at the front here. While we're getting the microphone, Piyush Mathur, insight without outcome is overhead.
Thank you.
It was Piyush.
Thank you, Piyush.
Amit has come up with loads of fantastic quotes, but that one is definitely Piyush's. Yes.
Hi, I have a question about the simplicity model that you're describing. Can you give us an example of how you have persuaded a leader to go with your simple solution rather than a complex proposed solution?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So why take something more simple or something that's a little bit more esoteric and go with that instead of something more complex, right? So so I've been at the organization I'm at for about 4.5 years. We got those original data science questions, right? Like, why do people leave the organization? And this was when we were coming into COVID, and then we were coming into the Great Resignation. And those sorts of things, I said, look, we can look into that for you, but it's going to change and shift over time. The parameters will change, what people we bring in will change, a lot will shift, and it's not going to ultimately get you to where you want. What we did instead is look, for a healthy way to look at your organization, look at those 3 metrics: hire, promotion, turnover. If they are not following a particular pattern, something's not clicking right. That model will hold across time. And I like the way you asked that question, because I almost did it in reverse. I pitched the 3 lines first, almost before they could really get entrenched and say that, because I proactively sold the thing I knew that was A, better for them, and B, I knew was scalable. So one thing I didn't share here is find the things that you can do really well. Like, think of sales, like you want a high margin thing, find the thing you can do really well, proactively sell it before they ask for something else. Because then that puts us in the position where if they ask for something else, say, well, I could do that, but this other thing, you won't get this data or that piece of thing, which is really going to be better for you. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a question here, Mike. So I think it's a really good point you make, Chris, about the consulting element around this, because ultimately, if you're going to be a great storyteller, you've got to get it simple and get people to buy into it, and to Piyush's quote, actually do something with it as well. So
exactly, that's the litmus test for this, the action.
Michael.
Okay, I just have one question. What exactly do you do for a living?
Well, I'm not a radio announcer. I've been told I could do that. What do I do for a living? If you ask my kid, I just do emails all day. I go up to my office and I sit there for 10, and I've got, like Tony here, I've got a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. I make a difference. So I sit down with leaders and I help them to think about holistically, what are your people thinking and feeling and doing? And does it matter if you're a business? So for example, are your employees dissatisfied with their pay? Maybe. Does it actually matter? I hate to say it, like 6 times out of 10 it doesn't. In a small way, right? Depending on the metrics you look at. But what I do is I take the data, just enough to get me to tell those stories, but then I focus on, I build relationships. I have weekly phone calls with my partners. I connect with senior leaders. I proactively try to sell them things. I look to see what's going on with the data, and I work with my wonderful team. I have 2 of my wonderful teammates here. We really think hard about that stuff, but we spend as little time as we can in the data and as much time as we can building those relationships. And we're going to have a DEI panel tomorrow, so please come to that selfish pitch. I've got to spend that time because I need good relationships with my legal team. I need good relationships with employee relations. I need good relationships with compensation and benefits on top of the business. So I need that 90% of time to be spent on that.
Yeah. And one more question right at the front here. This is where everyone asks questions, in this little group here, I've noticed.
There's been some research about that in classes, the T, so those down the middle and the front. Sorry.
Was there a time where you've kind of come to the conclusion that a more complex methodology is needed rather than more of a simple one?
Yes, right. And so the way I think about that is kind of like a good dinner dish. There's always going to be a place for some spice, some complexity, right? So we've had, for example, requests recently from some of our leadership, like they want AI in there. So we have to be very careful about where we bring that in, because I'm not going to just bring it in black boxes. So you might have heard in the previous session, where do we use that really well? So it's like, well, they want AI, and we collect open-ended comments, and our employees don't feel like they're being heard. And so we look around, and I'm trying to put all the pieces together. We connect the dots. Like, that's a big thing we do in people analytics. It's like, this is the place for just the right amount of complexity. And I'll tell you, it sounds great, but when you want to set it up so it fits into that framework, I take a lot of pride that our business partners go, they click once, it gets to the business or function they want to see, and then they just go about their way. When I bring in that complexity, it upends that entire system. Now they've got to go to a second system to again filter to their business. I don't want that, unless the juice is worth the squeeze. So thank you.
And we got time for one more question. We've got flashing red. Yes, Jay, you're going against the grain here.
We're still on the T, right?
I did that on purpose just so that I wouldn't be disruptive to the person handling the mic. So the complexity piece, the part that I'm struggling with is you seem to describe a people analytics organization that is highly consultative and does not necessarily own a lot of the infrastructure, which may or may not be the case for many of the people in this room. So first question is that actually true? And if so, how do you solve for some of the things that we talked about earlier the day around data integrity, data cleanliness, reliability, all of that stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question and a great assumption. Do we maybe offshore or ship out some of the more complex stuff? And the short answer is, I would say probably no. We've actually taken the opposite approach. As much as you probably can in people analytics, we own teeth to tail the data value cycle. So no, we don't technically own our HRIS system. We have global partners who support that, but we pull the data from the HRIS system. We have our own data warehouse, if you will. We have our own ETL, extract, transform, load technologies. We have our own way of visualizing and disseminating some of the data. And I would love to spread that. If you haven't used KNIME, K-N-I-M-E, seriously write that down, go home, download it, and start to use it if you haven't. But we leverage these tools so that we have full self-ownership because it's a little bit more work, but it's simpler. We know it's going into our data, and it's point and click, join this data. Point and click, filter out that. Point and click, do this. And if there's one or two errors in the data, it pops up and stores it, but it doesn't shut the system down. If you've used Power Query, all it takes is that one cell, and your whole thing goes to a halt. We don't want that because we want to focus on the consulting. We value progress over perfection. So if we have one cell out of 8.4 million that doesn't line up perfectly, I don't care. If your turnover is 7.16 or 7.15, I don't care. It doesn't make a difference. It's directionally correct. And I will tell you, to be very candid up front, we communicate this in every consult we have with the business, that we value progress over perfection because people are imperfect and their data are imperfect. And we value directionality over absolute precision. And that's enough. And they get richness and they feel like they have a path forward, which is a home run for me as far as I'm concerned. So thank you.
And Chris, just a sort of observation, really, the quote there, 10% data, 90% consulting. It's almost similar to Einstein's thing. If you had an hour to solve a problem, you spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem, 5 minutes trying to solve it.
I don't think I've ever been compared to Einstein, and again, my wife would probably tell you not to. But it's thinking about the right way. So make no mistake, that 10%'s got to be solid.
Yeah. I'm
not saying you make it less valid, you make it less reliable, and I use those terms intentionally. I'm saying that you have to, with all the hours you have in the day, you shouldn't be committing much more than that, because get it right, get it quick. And if you are, find a way to force it down. But again, to the Einstein quote, the more time I spend on consulting, the more I'm doing what my job is changing hearts and minds to drive action and maximize impact. So thank you, David.
Chris, thank you very much. Thank you.